friends, and welcome to the final episode of the Charcoal Selfie series. In today's class, I'm going to be breaking down the steps of two very important things while working with colored pencil. The first is called varnishing, which you're going to learn a lot about, and the second is having smooth transitions when you're working with colored pencils. So I'm going to show you the steps of how to complete the top portion of this page for this project. So we're going to go through and you're going to follow along step by step, and I know it might seem like this would be super simple to know how to just do on your own without watching these steps, but I guarantee you that watching how to do this is super helpful when you're working on this portion of the project. For example, when you're working on these sections down at the bottom, the biggest tip I can give you is to start with your darkest color and then to do what's called overlaying with your lighter color, which you'll learn all about in this episode. After you have completed all of these practices up at the top, you're going to be doing a transfer of the object from your photo. So we're going to fill in the back of your picture, you're going to tape it onto this paper, and you're going to trace around the outside edges of your object so that you can have just a quick practice of your colored pencil before you're doing it on your final project that you've been working so hard to shade. So we're going to do a practice on this. You're going to trace out all of your lines, and you're going to use the techniques that you practiced up above to complete the coloring part of this practice down below. So I'm going to show you these steps, and then this portion will be applying those steps to your object. At the end of this episode, I'm also going to be introducing the steps for completing your final project. So I'm going to just walk you through step by step of how you're going to complete this final project and what you need to know to receive a successful score. This first step is to practice the incorrect way of working with colored pencils, and that means that you can see through that grainy texture. Oftentimes students will add like a dark background, you can see your lines, but what we're working towards is what's called varnishing, and varnishing means that you've filled in your paper so solidly with colored pencil that you can see almost like a waxy texture showing through. So you can see the difference here of like adding a light shade compared to filling in a solid section of colored pencil. And we're first practicing varnishing with pressure, but the next way to varnish is an option if you want to use that same color but have a lighter version of it. So we filled in our first practice by using small little circles and pressing as hard as we could, but with this next section we're going to do a similar thing where we're filling in this space using very small circular techniques. And I even sort of work like a printer where I make one row and then I continue by overlapping with that row to just fill in that space. And our goal is to make this as even and smooth as possible. We're also trying to keep this just a little bit lighter rather than varnishing right off the bat, because this is our section where we're practicing varnishing with white, where we can get that same color to be varnished, but we're making it a lighter version of that color compared to varnishing with pressure. So next we're going to go over the top of this with our white colored pencil, and I typically like to go in the opposite direction of the way that I was coloring originally when I'm varnishing. So I try to do this horizontally compared to the vertical strokes that I was using to fill in that solid blue. For our third method of varnishing, we're going to fill it in with that same color, but we're still pressing just a little bit lighter because we're going to practice varnishing with another color. So when we're doing this step, we're just continuing to work with those small circular motions. Again, I like to work like a printer, so I'm just making rows of small circles and spinning my pencil so that I'm working with my sharper point. Sometimes I'll even continuously sharpen my pencil to help with keeping this nice and smooth and even. And once I've filled this in, I need to choose another color to varnish with. And I think that for this step, it's very helpful to work with a color that is lighter than the color that you were laying down first. And again, we're going to go the opposite direction of the way that we went with our first color to help make sure that we're making it as smooth looking as possible. So I'm just taking this yellow here and going horizontally over the top of that blue to make it as smooth and varnished as I can. Next, we're going to complete our color shade practice. And you'll notice with all of these value scale transitions that we always start with our darker color. So for this one, with our color shade, we are working on fading our color to black. So since black is obviously going to be the darkest of all, we're going to begin by filling in with our black. And we're going to start by filling it in so solidly that it's already varnished with pressure. Once we've done that for a ways, we're going to just slowly start lightening up. And we want to continue working with this black almost all the way to the end of this scale. So we want to have just a small section at the end where it's fading all the way out to white. And it is really important that you have that smooth transition all the way out to white before you overlay with our next color. You can choose any color that you'd like to work with to complete this second portion of the color shade. And we're just going to go to the opposite side and fill in a varnished section of the color of your choice. Now, I just went through and filled it in as solidly as I could, varnishing all the way with pressure, and you're actually going to do this step all the way through to the very end of the value scale. So I'm just going through and filling in the entire value scale with my lighter color, and I'm varnishing with pressure. And you'll notice that this really cool effect happens where, because we already laid down that layer of our darker color, it's going to slowly mix with our lighter color and make a super smooth transition with minimal effort. For the color tint scale, we are trying to take one color and fade it all the way out to white. So we're going to begin with any color of your choice, and we're going to make sure it's nice and varnished on one end, and we're slowly going to help this transition out into just a smooth fade to white. Now, when you're working this way, it's important to make sure that your colored pencil is sharp and that you're continuously rotating your pencil to get that sharp edge to help you as you're starting to fade and transition. I also like to work with small circular motions for this step just to help this be as smooth as possible. Once it has a perfectly smooth transition all the way out to white, you're going to take your white colored pencil, which I know seems strange because the paper's white, so why do you need to do another layer? But you're going to take that pencil and you're going to go the opposite direction of the way that you were coloring originally, and it's going to make it look so much smoother, and it's going to help varnish the area that was a little bit lighter at the end. To complete the color fade scale, we're going to be taking two colors and having them transition together. And again, we're going to begin with our darker color. So for this one, I'm working with red and yellow, so I'm choosing to lay down my red first because it's darker. We're going to begin in the exact same way we're varnishing in one end of our value scale and slowly transitioning all the way out to white. And we want this to be as smooth as possible, working with small circular motions, making sure that we're rotating to use the sharper portion of our pencil and helping this to be a smooth, perfect transition. And finally, we're going to take our lighter color and we're going to go in the opposite direction of the way that we were coloring for our original value scale. And we're going to varnish over the entire rest of the value scale. So I'm coloring horizontally, I'm making sure that I'm pressing really hard, and this is going to help it have a smooth transition. It's going to be varnished all the way through, and it should end up looking like this. Once you have completed all of the skill building practices for this unit, which includes the colored pencil page that I just demonstrated, the section underneath that applies all of the techniques that you learned in this episode, and once you have completed your charcoal skill building practice, then you are ready to begin on your final project. To start this project, you're going to end up with a full-size piece of gray toned paper, and you're going to receive 2 copies of your selfie portrait. So one of those copies is to look at and use as a reference photo. It should be next to you while you're working the entire time, while your second copy is one that you're going to fill in on the back of it so that you can use it to tape along the top edge and transfer all of the details onto your final paper. This step is going to be super helpful for you. The more that you transfer, the less that you have to come up with on your own. So the more detail you give yourself, the more realistic it's going to be. So this step is one of the most important steps that you can complete, is working super hard on the pencil transfer. When I'm going through and doing pencil transfers, especially for something like this, I like to fill in a lot of the dark blacks so that I can make sure that I recognize when I'm drawing that those areas are darker. And I also like to go through and highlight or outline any edges where values change. So you saw some examples of that when we were working on our skill building for the charcoal practice, and that is going to be very helpful when you're working on this step, because the more detail you transfer, the easier you're going to make it on yourself when you're adding in your shading. While you were working on your charcoal skill building practice, you had your extra reference photo page, and I would highly recommend using this as a hand resting place while you're working, because especially for those left-handed students, you probably really have struggles where you might be drawing, if I'm left-handed, and going across this page and it smears along that outside edge of your hand, and then you're just smearing as you go. Now, a really great trick to solve that for both left-handed and for right-handed people is to take a piece of blank paper and set it over the top of the area that you've already completed. And while you're working, you can move your hand around and have it still resting on your paper, and you're not blurring all of the work that you've already done. So it doesn't matter if it's this page necessarily, just as long as you have an extra piece of printer paper, which you can collect from the paper trays. But you do need to be working with an extra piece of paper so that you can move your hand around without blurring all of your details. The first step for filling in the actual charcoal values on your final project is to take your white charcoal pencil and your Q-tip that you've been using to blend in your white values, and you're going to fill in all of the white areas that you see in your reference photo, and you're going to do that first. And the reason why is because we want to have a chance to blend it with your Q-tip before it has the possibility of getting mixed together with your black charcoal pencil. Remember that something that we're going for with this is having the transition from the white charcoal pencil to the gray tone of your paper, then to black. We want to avoid having areas where the white charcoal pencil is fading directly into the black charcoal pencil, because it gives you a different shade of gray from the background of your paper, and it's just not quite as smooth. So we want to start out with your white charcoal pencil and blending it with your Q-tip first. Then you're going to move on to working with your black charcoal pencil and your blending stump. And you're going to go through and add in all of the very darkest values. And remember that you do not need to add in the medium tones with your charcoal pencil. Your medium tones should be created by using your blending stump, because this makes a much nicer light value than trying to add it in with the pencil, which gives you more of a grainy value and can become very quickly overwhelming. It can get really too dark because this charcoal spreads like crazy. So it is really important to make sure that you only add in your very darkest values with this and use your blending stump to go back through and smooth it out. Oftentimes, once students have gone through and added both their white charcoal pencil with their Q-tip and their black charcoal pencil with their blending stump, they feel like they are finished, when really that is just your first layer. And the more layers that you can add, the more that you can kind of build up those values and really focus on your reference photo and going back and forth and looking at them next to each other to find details that you can add. That's going to benefit your drawing so much. And if you just leave it at that first layer, it's usually pretty apparent that you have not gone through to complete this step. So make sure that you're doing your second, third, fourth layers, because if you just have that first layer, that's not going to be enough detail. The final step that you'll complete with charcoal for this project is adding in your background, and you do have quite a bit of freedom with this. However, there is one requirement, that it fades from super dark black all the way out to the gray tone of the paper. Now, your first option would be to fill in the very top of your paper with black and to have it fade down to gray right up against where it's hitting you along the outside edge of your face. So you can have it just be horizontal, kind of like fading and gradually getting closer to gray. You could also do the opposite, so you could start out with the black up against your shoulders and hair and have it start to get lighter as it goes up on the paper. You also could do what's called like a halo effect, so you could have it be dark all the way around and sort of just getting lighter as it gets closer to you, more of like a vignette lighting. So those are some options, but you do have to have it start out solid black, fading to the gray tone of the paper. And it really does depend on your photograph and what will work best. I would recommend that if you have really light hair or light clothing on that's like the very outside edge of where it's going, the values will be touching you, I would recommend having it be darker up against you to make those areas stand out. Whereas if you have really dark hair or if you have dark clothing on in the areas that are on the outside edges of you for your selfie, then I would recommend fading and getting lighter to make those areas stand out. So adding in this background is really focusing on adding contrast to your background. The final step that you're going to complete for this project is to use the colored pencils to go through and varnish and add in the bright color on your object. So you're going to be focusing on varnishing, and you're going to be focusing on smooth transitions, and finally you'll be focusing on adding intricate details. So those are things that you really need to be considering as you're finishing up this final project. The rubric for this project can be found on the back of your brainstorm that you completed at the beginning of the unit. So you can look on the back to see what all of the different categories are, and you will be graded on your creativity of your photo / your idea for what object you're holding. In the charcoal section of this rubric, you'll be graded on 3 things: your shading and transition skills, having a full range of values, and the accuracy of your facial features. In the colored pencil section, you're going to be graded on your shading and transition skills, your colored pencil varnishing, and your accuracy of your object. Next, overall, for the entire project, you'll be graded on the quality of your details, your craftsmanship and neatness, and your effort and use of class time. So that is how you're going to complete this project. Those were all of the steps. I know that it's quite in-depth, but it is going to be so worth it at the end of this unit when you end up with a beautiful masterpiece. And I'm so excited to see what you guys create. So let's go ahead and get started. Thanks for watching.